teaching is necessary for success. So when I say, don't, all I've done is take out all the things that they were doing. And I haven't then stepped into the place where I'm like, do these things. This is what success looks like, right? Do this thing. So that positive focus, I think, then leads us to the place where we're like, oh, not just scolding, but also using my expertise to guide you into successful behaviors. Hello, everybody. I am Rachel Phillips-Buck. This is Cap and Gown. So happy to be joined today by Dr. Sherry Woosley. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Oh, look at all of my, listen, this is my favorite time of the webinar because I start seeing all of my friends popping on. Amy is here and I was just on her campus last week. Holly is here and she's changed campuses. So I'm happy to get to see her. Lindsay is in the running for, I think she's only missed like twice since we've started doing it, which is amazing. Your Matt is here. So hi, Matt. Good to see you. Thank you guys so much for joining. I see this is like, I had a client the other day tell me this was like romper room, you know, where you're calling out like, I see Debbie and I see Brian and I see Suzanne. So hi, friends. Thank you guys for joining us. If you are joining us later in the week, listening to the podcast, happy to have you as well. It's always so good to be able to take this time to just think through issues in higher education, the jobs that we're doing, the ways that we're empowering students. So thank you for joining. There are a couple of ways for you to get in touch with us if you have questions or if you want to share our podcast, or if you want to see old ones. You can go to taplink.cc/Ferris resources and see all of the resources that we've been providing over the last year or so. Sherry, one of my favorite is the one that you and I did about sense of belonging, regarded to your book chapter that is coming out soon, which I am going to try and give to a bunch of people.
I just got a notice on it, so I'll send it to you. It's coming out in April.
Please, that is, I love it. It's going to be really good. Okay, so I usually, when I have a guest, I do 20 questions, but fortunately I get to have you often. So I am only going to do 5 questions with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, would you rather watch nothing but Hallmark Christmas movies or nothing but horror movies?
Hallmark Christmas, happy endings.
Really? Okay, that's
happy
good to know.
endings. Yeah.
They're hard to come by, you know, so when we can get them, we should.
Yeah.
Would you rather spend the weekend with pirates or ninjas?
Oh, ninjas.
Oh, okay.
Deadly and silent. No, it's a Bare Naked Ladies kids song. The ninjas were deadly and silent.
There you go. They're just like shadows, right, coming through. Okay. Would you rather eat only pizza for a year or no pizza for the next 5 years?
Only pizza.
I would too. I mean, I really love.
I can do it a lot of different ways.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It can feel like different meals. Okay. Would you rather be able to read minds or predict the future?
Oh, that's hard. I've always thought that if I could read minds, it'd just confirm what I think of people. So that in some cases would be lovely. In other cases, I don't necessarily want to know.
Yeah.
But predicting the future would kind of be awful because I don't want either of those.
Happen.
No.
Like, I reject the gift. I'm not going to have it. I reject it. Okay, and then this last one, I just asked Anthony last week because although we've done all these shows, I've never asked him this. What is your favorite color?
Oh, okay. So this is an artist's answer.
Okay.
Prussian blue.
It's I know that color.
Blue. It's beautiful.
Yes, that's a great answer. All right, well, there you go. You made it through our 5 questions. Thank you for playing with me. Pretty easy. Also, we did have to show this picture because I will tell those of you joining us today, one thing that I love about Sherry is that she is enthusiastic about trying new hard things, which is an uncommon character trait for most people. So I really appreciate that. So tell us why I have a picture of drums on the screen.
I have started to learn how to play the drums and it's hilarious. Like, it's hilarious because I mean, these are rock drums and whatever. But it is, as you said, it's really, really good to be really bad at something. And to live through that and to live through the getting feedback and struggling. And the one thing I like about the drums as compared to other, like I did piano way back, but drums, you get the feedback fast, but you also get all these little successes very quickly. So it's been so fun.
That's really nice. So maybe the next time you come on, you can do a little drum solo for us.
Drums are for me, not for public.
Not for everyone to see. You won't drum with you. Well, I love that. And I think it is, I think you're right. When we get older, we forget sometimes how hard it is to be bad at things that you have to do. And like just thinking about like grade school kids, how all day long, all they're doing is working at things that they have to improve at. And so it is a good way to stay humble. And also, I think a really good way to remember how you want to have feedback, which is what we're talking about today, and encouragement and those sorts of things. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our roadmap today, I'm going to do State of the Union. Today, remember, is I think we're on 6 on our conditions for student success. This is specifically about feedback, although Tinto includes in his discussion of feedback, monitoring and assessing, and then looking at that feedback piece. So that's what we're going to talk about and break it out into those 2 pieces. And then like we always do, we are going to give you some action items. If you do not have that article, Shauna has chatted it to you so that you can look at it. If you are joining us on podcast, all you have to type into Google is taking student retention seriously, rethinking the first year of college. And you'll be able to see that. It's a really well-known article that's quoted everywhere. So let's start with our State of the Union. First of all, Sherry, some fun things. You and I were talking about the chair, which is on Prime, which not everyone is going to love, but it's pretty entertaining if you are interested in higher education. Also, Amazon has a new show that's called The College Tour, which is where they go through and talk about a freshman's experience on lots of different campuses. And one of our schools, I think it's the next season, Sacred Heart is going to be featured on that. So that's going to be really fun. But like Arizona State and all sorts of different experiences. So that is something that I would encourage everyone to look at. And then the last thing before we get actually into the State of the Union is I think time before last, we were talking about, Matt's passing me a note that the chair is on Netflix. I think I said Prime, but it's on Netflix. Last time we were together, we were talking about the language of conditionally admitted students and how awful it is. And we were saying, we have got to come up with a better language to use for students than conditionally admitted because of all of the implications of like, you might make it, you might not. Well, I was talking to Mary Hardin-Baylor this morning and their provost was telling me that they call those students opportunity students, which I am in love with. And I think that we should change all of our language to that. So that is a solution to a problem that we identified a couple of weeks ago where I've just been like, what could we possibly call it? Opportunity students, I think is awesome. All right, so State of the Union, you guys know we've COVID, blah, 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 going on all the time. I do want to give you some results from a survey. So this is a survey that was closed in August 20th. It was of different institutions. 65% of the schools said they plan to open normal in-person classes. 31% of them said that they're going to offer a mix of in-person, online instruction. So I'm really curious to hear, for those of you who have joined us live, what you've been doing over the last couple of weeks, because I know we're well now into the semester. About 48%, approximately half, 48% of the 900 respondents said their colleges were requiring vaccinations for students, which is very interesting. 43% are requiring for students and for employees. And about 2/3 say that they have a mask mandate in place. So all of that's interesting just in terms of benchmarking. What's really remarkable is they split it out by region. So 53% of schools in the South have a mask mandate, 73% from the Midwest and the Northeast, and then on the West, it's 84%. So I found that really interesting, just how it's so much about kind of where your school is. The number of schools, which right now is about 1,000 that are requiring the vaccination, jumped by 300 as soon as Pfizer moved from the emergency use now to the full approval. So a lot of schools were waiting for that to decide whether or not they needed to make that change. And then the last thing that I think you'll appreciate, Sherry, this came out of the survey. It says, professors and staff feel prepared to return to remote learning if needed. 71% of faculty and staff said they're extremely or very confident in their ability to shift to online learning. And 92% felt confident that students were well prepared for such a shift. So first of all, can we just imagine 3 years ago, the statistic that 71% of faculty and staff are like, we can go online, we can do it, we know how to do it, like, but no way. I bet it was in the 20s back then. So, we've talked about kintsugi, like something broke and this beautiful thing is coming out that we have a new competency. But I'm really curious about 92% felt confident students are well prepared for such a shift back to online learning. And I would like to have some definitions, right? Like, what does that mean? Like they have a computer and so now they can do it, or they know better how to do online. I would really like to dig into that piece because I don't love that statistic.
So that was a survey of the faculty staff who said students are able?
Yes. Yes.
So that could be a visibility problem. They don't know what
they would. Yeah. How would they know? Like, how did you gather that information? How would we talk about thriving in an online class versus, what does this say? Confident students are well prepared for such a shift. So I think there's a lot of questions around that. I don't know about that. Okay, also schools, you should be thinking right now about, Biden just recently passed his vaccine mandates for all sorts of things like federal employees and that sort of thing. The reason it's relevant right now is because there's a lot of confusion about how it affects colleges and universities. So one question is, anybody who has a federal contract is considered to be kind of under this vaccine mandate. So the question for schools are, if, for example, if you are running obviously a larger institution, a federal research lab, and so you have a contract, do you have some obligation under this mandate? But also they're talking about like land grant universities. Does that constitute a contract? Is there something that you're supposed to do because of that? They're working to determine how that's going to affect campuses. So we don't have a clear picture on that. It's not been made transparent. What I think is, so two questions coming out of that. One is, what is going to happen for public colleges and universities who have a contract with the government, but are in states like Arizona, Arkansas, Georgia, that actually have a law against a vaccine mandate? That's going to be a whole thing that people have to untangle. And then lastly, how do we define a contract with the government? So, for things like Title IX, it's like, if you take federal money, you have to do these certain things. Does that mean, is that what we're talking about, federal money, or are we talking about like a legitimate, we have this agreement with the government? So a lot of things to figure out there. We'll keep paying attention to that, but I think schools are pretty confused about what it will mean. Okay. There is a great article in University of Business. We will chat you the link. It's called 5 Ways Higher Education Will Forever Change Due to the Pandemic, which I know there are a lot of these. There's 5 different things like testing is going to be optional, and we've got to know how to do hybrid, and we have to be able to master educational technology. But the 2 that I think are most interesting, this author, Lori Capullo, says value is going to have to be demonstrated, which we have been talking a lot about, how you are going to have to say, this is why you should come here. So colleges and universities have to be more reflective about the value that they offer in exchange for ever rising tuition costs, and whether or not families are going to be ready to pay for that perceived value. And also, she predicts that there's going to be a lot more questions about how we launch graduates into prosperous careers, and a lot more sort of kicking the tires on graduation rates, retention rates, and then what those career paths are that you have coming out of school, which I think is right on. It's a great time to be investing in your career center. And then the last conclusion that this author made is that elite colleges and universities will no longer be considered the gold standard. So we have a broader perspective of what is good about an institution. And she says public flagship and up and coming private schools that are innovative, cost effective, and student and employer centric are going to become more attractive. So I think that that's an encouragement to so many of our schools who are investing in those things and figuring out how to be, really intuitive. Okay, two more small things. Marijuana use is at the highest rate since 1980 among our college students, as well as the highest rate of LSD and mushroom use since 1982. So that's bad. But the good news is that there's been a significant drop in college students' alcohol use. So that is way down since I think, I don't even have the date of how low it is, but it's a historic low for binge drinking. They're basically asking students, when's the last time that you were drunk in the last 60 days or something like that? And there's a lot of guessing that that is about students being separated, so they don't have the social situations where they would be encouraged to drink. This brought up a question for me about schools that are in states where marijuana is legal. If they have had to change their student conduct language to be like, you can't use illegal and illicit drugs, also you can't use marijuana, also you can't use alcohol. I'd be really curious. There's a whole schooling that I would be happy to have about how we've had to change our student conduct policies. And then the last one is that the Big 12 has gained 4 universities. They lost University of Texas at Austin and University of Oklahoma, but they've gained Brigham Young, University of Cincinnati, Houston, Central Florida are all going to be new members. And that's going to take place July of 2023 for Brigham Young, and then July 1st of 2024. So that's exciting. Okay, so I'm supposed to say at the end of State of the Union, and that's the State of the Union. So I do pretty good on that one, I think. Yeah. Okay, so Sherry, let's remind everyone, we are talking about conditions of student success. We've talked about commitment from the institution to increasing student success, setting expectations for students, making sure we are providing support financially, academically, socially. Today, you and I are going to talk about feedback. And I'm really excited about the opportunity for us just to pause for the next, 50 minutes and say, these are ways that you can use feedback with your students. I do want to remind everybody, the quote from Tinto that I keep pulling out and pulling us back to is, access without support is not opportunity. And as I told you, opportunity students, which are students who have this opportunity now, I think this quote applied to that is so important, right? We are giving you an opportunity, but we have to make sure that that is coming both with access and with support. So we need to make sure that we're investing in student support as we go along. All right, so let's start with monitoring and assessing. This is a really important piece. Can you guys hear that? Can you hear that, Sherry? They're doing construction in the office above. And so if you're like a weird drilling, you're not going crazy. That is actually happening right now. Okay. Okay.
It's pretty soft, at least from what I've heard.
Okay, good. I'll try to.
Like, now that you said it, I can hear it, but otherwise.
Okay, so let's start with monitoring and assessing, because the feedback that we're going to give to our students obviously is going to come from some sort of assessment that we've done. And I want to, before we dive into this piece, I just want to remind everybody that Tinto is always focused on academics. So he talks in this paper about tests and quizzes and 1-minute papers, and you and I were talking about your iClicker tool, which can you just give us like a summary of how that would work in a classroom?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a clicker in the classroom. They say clickers, but it's often phones. But it's a way to ask students a question and get responses from all the students immediately. And then I think in best use cases, then the faculty member either shows the students and has that help direct teaching. If students didn't get it, let's change the thing. If lots of them get it, let's talk about why. Let's talk about what they chose or didn't choose. It can be fact-based, it can be opinion-based, but it's a way to engage students. But as you said, get feedback, right?
Yeah.
They get to see it too.
And I love that for a faculty member to be able to be like, wow, I totally missed that explanation. That I did a terrible job on that. No one understands it. Before I let you go to do the homework, let's readdress that. So I love that. Those are the kinds of things that Tinto is talking about specifically. But we are translating for our audience who's not just from the academic side, but also from the student development side, student support side, to be thinking about how are you using assessments and then feedback for things like transition into college, for things like shock factors that are happening, your 2 measurements of sense of belonging and homesickness distress. We have to figure out how to assess for those things and then give good feedback. So we're broadening what Tinto is talking about by talking about both of those different elements. And so let's start with assessments. You and I both love surveys. Our surveys are focused on faculty and your surveys are focused on students. So I have up on this slide the schedule for you guys and how you would recommend that schools are sending these surveys. So Sherry, can you, for benefit of those who can't see our slide, who are just listening to us, can you go through these and just give us kind of an overview of how you're collecting this information and what each of these is about?
Yeah. Well, one thing to keep in mind, first of all, is no single student would get all the surveys. So they're very much tied to points in time and groups of students. So prior to the term starting, you might start with something like a readiness survey. So the readiness survey, do they have the tech? Are they ready? Are they motivated? Are they coming to campus ready to get started? And if not, what can we do with that? So then the sort of next critical time point, if you will, is 3 weeks. We found 3 weeks to be a lovely time. They have a little bit of experience on campus. They haven't gotten too far in. So typically what we send out is a student success survey, short little 15-question survey of students. How's it going? Homesickness, distress, academic motivation, but also academic behaviors. So what are they doing right now that we maybe want to give them some feedback on and help them with? We also offer a parallel one for students on probation. And that gets into a little more of academic behaviors and do you understand the probation policies? So students typically are split into one of those. The other survey that is often sent out at the 3-week mark is for the students you would expect to be back who aren't. Let's find out where they are. What are they doing? Is the departure decision temporary? So we should be looking ahead to help get them back
on our list. Yeah.
Permanent. So trying to find out where are they and what are they doing. The next critical time point is typically somewhere around midterm. So maybe it's 8 weeks. And I think of it around midterms or as they're planning the next schedule, right? Picking classes. So you want to check back in. How are academics going now that they maybe have midterm grades back, have more experience? How are they doing socially integrating? What are their behaviors? Are they starting to hit a slump or where are they? So find out where they are midterms and help with that. And then there's another survey right after the term, having them reflect back on how did it go? How are they feeling about the term? Do they feel like they fit here? But also to get them to think, are they already making plans for next semester, next term? So I think the lovely thing about that is kind of thinking about it as what are our critical time points that we know about?
Yeah. And all of this information, which you and I will kind of unpack a little bit more, but the purpose of monitoring and assessing is not just so that you're like, okay, well, now we have that, but that actually we are going to use it for the student's benefit when we're at the place where we're providing that feedback. And so we can talk about, for all of these, how you would use that information, get it to the right people to be able to provide feedback. You cover so many issues in these surveys. I just want to give kind of an overall, so like academic coursework, academic resilience, course struggles, financial need, instructor communication, satisfaction, study time. There's just so many different pieces that you can look at that will help you as you're trying to figure out how to give appropriate feedback. So I love that. I want to talk about that third week, because you and I have come to this conclusion separately, but it's the same conclusion, so I think it must be right. And that is, as I'm considering asking our faculty in our stoplight survey, which everybody should be doing, hey, faculty, it's been 3 weeks. I'm not asking you for grades. I'm not asking you for, you know what a successful student looks like. Just tell me the ones you're worried about, who are not engaged, who are not paying attention, who don't seem to understand the concepts. That place where a student is both reporting, hey, I don't feel like I'm doing a great job, and a faculty member who has a lot of expertise is also reporting, hey, you're not doing a great job. That mix of those two surveys, I think, is so valuable as we're thinking about monitoring and assessing. So again, we'll talk about how to use that for feedback, but I think that that's really important. Also, I would encourage you guys, as you're assessing, to be thinking about how are you requesting information from people who might not necessarily give it to you unprompted. So how are we, in Ferris, we're doing that through our feedback request. Hey, can you please tell me, I see you're connected to the student. Can you tell me how they're doing in your class? Hey, RA, can you tell me if they have a sense of belonging within those res halls? So that idea that we are both requesting information to help us with our feedback so that we have that data, but then also leaning on something like admissions counselors who can give us a leading indicator that says, just so you know, the student doesn't really want to come here, their mom is making them. All of those leading and lagging indicators are going to give us what we need to be able to make wise and powerful feedback suggestions and conversations with our student. And then the last thing I'll say about that is just behavioral monitoring. So I challenge schools all the time. Like, you guys know the thing that if a school is not, or if a student is not doing, they're probably not getting the best of your community, right? So we work with schools where we're like looking at their meal plan usage, or did they come to these big hall meetings that we had? Or what is the thing where if a student misses out on this, we would say, oh gosh, we need to give them some feedback about that, because that really is the best of what we have to offer. And so those behavioral things with what a student is saying, with what your community is saying, is going to really help you hone your feedback to be beautiful. Okay, so let's move on to feedback. I'm just going to assume that you guys are doing all of our best practices for how we're collecting that information and monitoring, but there's some really specific things that we can talk about with feedback. And Sherry, you and I have talked about quickly and often. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why like iClicker is so great, because that's now. We didn't wait 3 weeks for me to give you a test to say, wow, no one understood that concept, I must have done a terrible job. Right now, I'm able to say, okay, the feedback is I didn't do a good job. We've got to move through. So what do you have to say about quickly and often with your feedback?
Well, I think they're critical, because the faster somebody gets the feedback, the faster they can change behaviors or get support or get help. So if you're thinking like outside of the classroom, as soon as we know somebody maybe has a homesickness distress issue, we want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And if you wait 3 weeks, that may be too long. And we used to see that if we waited till midterms, it was too long.
Yeah.
And then I think on the frequent side, I think the reason that is important, at least in my mind, or kind of in the scheme of things, is things do change. So I may start off really excited about this semester. It may be going really well. And then, and every RA I've ever talked to will say, and then they broke up with their significant other. And then they got into a class they hated. And then they fought with a roommate. And then they got sick for a week and got behind. So I think that's why frequent matters.
Yeah, Sherry, as you're saying that, what it makes me think of is like when I was a student, I had a certain leniency for how long it was going to take me to get used to being in college.
Yeah.
So if you had asked me in the beginning, like I wasn't distressed and I didn't feel, because I was like, I know this is hard. It's going to be hard for a couple of weeks, right? But as soon as that time period passes and I still don't feel like I have friends and then all of a sudden I am distressed. It's not going the way that I thought. And so although I would have had a very positive feeling about it in the beginning, things do change based on what happens, or even just the kind of allowance that you've given yourself to be able to make that transition or learn how to do college academically or with your friend, your peer group or whatever, right? I think that's really good. I also, we talk all the time about this idea of success debt and feedback for students before they are drowning is so vital. I think about the impact survey, that we did in March of 2020 to be like, what is happening? You guys are going home and what's going on? Well, the fact that we had that information meant that students who didn't have technology, students who had food insecurity, students who didn't have a place to be, we could address that quickly before it's like the semester is half over and you haven't done anything that you need to. So I think that that's really important. You and I also talked about with feedback and making sure that it's positive. Yeah. And you brought this idea up of like, the reason it has to be positive is because we have to focus on what we want, right? So can you talk more about that?
Well, there's two things to me on the positive side of things. One is we'd all rather have a conversation about positive anyway. Right? Like, and so like the example that a friend of mine used, and I think this is exactly right, is if you tell somebody they need to have grit, that's a deficit model. You, Rachel, need to have grit. That means you don't have it.
Right.
And that's not a fun conversation. Whereas if I say, Rachel, tell me about a time like, or maybe you play sports and as sports, you came back. Let's talk about that. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do we bring that to this? It's a positive conversation. It's really lovely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say, I like it too, because you're calling up in them a thing they know versus calling up in them a vacuum. Yeah. So if you say to me, like, you don't have this thing, how are you going to, I'm like, well, I don't even know how to think about it then. Right. Versus like, you do have it. Call that up in your brain. What was that like? I think that that's so powerful.
The other thing I think on this is, and this was, I think I told you this, I learned this with little kids, is you tell them what to do, not what not to do.
Right.
So like, the classic is if you think really little, if you think 3-year-olds and you say, okay, let's all stand in line and they don't quite know, and they're, and keep your hands to yourself and keep quiet and all the things that you shouldn't do, don't touch your partner, whatever. But if you say to them, use an inside voice, we say that because they know what that is and they know what that means.
Yeah.
And it's what they should do, not what they shouldn't do.
So I love that so much, because I was telling you before we started about conscious discipline, Dr. Becky Bailey. Here's what she says about the power of attention. She's saying the power of attention helps us understand that what we focus on, we get more of. Where we place our attention teaches children what to value. They quickly know that we either see them for helpful or hurtful behaviors. This is what I love. When we focus our attention on a problem behavior, our mind is not open to a solution. Shifting our focus onto positive actions we want children to use enables adults to see that teaching is necessary for success. So when I say, don't, all I've done is take out all the things that they were doing. And I haven't then stepped into the place where I'm like, do these things. This is what success looks like, right? Do this thing. So that positive focus, I think, then leads us to the place where we're like, oh, not just scolding, but also using my expertise to guide you into successful behaviors, right?
I think I told you about trying to get a preschool classroom clean. You know, when you got 20 little kids all running around and half of them are playing, but there are some that are cleaning. And so to go, Rachel, you're doing such a good job, and saying it loud enough so everybody hears. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you got all that stuff put away. Oh yeah, that's where the carpets go. Yeah, and that focus changes the whole dynamic of the class.
Because they're like, oh, Sherry is looking at me when I'm doing good things, not scolding me when I'm doing bad things, which, remember, like, both of those are attention, right? I either get attention for bad things or I get attention for good things. So I really love that. And I think with college students, you know, we're always talking about this expert model where we have a lot of expertise in how to be successful in higher education. We know a lot about that, but they have a lot of expertise in themselves and what works for them and where they're struggling. And so to be able to say positively, these are things that you can do. I mean, I think the best example of this is coaches, when they're like, you will sit on the first row, you will attend every class, you will, right? As opposed to like, hey, don't mess around, don't fail your classes, no, they're going through and saying, these are the behaviors that are going to help you be really successful. So,
or if you think outside of the classroom, you know, go talk to 2 people on your floor this week.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, don't sit in your room. Go talk to 2 people.
I was saying to you, like, so you were talking about like this concrete thing. When you say don't sit in your room and watch a movie on Friday night, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, but I like that. So what you've just done in my brain is like made me remember how much I like to sit in my room and watch a movie on Friday night, as opposed to saying, hey, go meet 2 new people, which then opens up possibilities that would be something that I would enjoy, as well as directing me in a concrete way to how I can be, successful in this thing.
Well, and it's kind of like the drums too. It's something really small and you get an immediate win. I talked to 2 people. Right. Now I can go watch a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I did 2 things, right? Like, this is what I'm going to practice. Oh my gosh, I got it. This one little thing. Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really fascinating is in that concrete and positive, when you are teaching students how to recognize what's happening to them internally. So emotionally focused therapy is all about feelings. And we don't say in emotionally focused therapy, like, well, do you feel angry? Because that's hard to understand. Well, I don't know. Do I feel angry? What we say is, hey, a lot of times when people feel angry, they feel it in their stomach. Do you feel that in your stomach when we're talking about this thing? Is your stomach getting sick? Does it feel tight? A lot of times when people are feeling anxiety, their back gets really tight and it's hard for them to breathe. When we're talking about this, do you have that feeling? That is very concrete, right? And so then we're teaching people, hey, pay attention, because when your back gets tight, what your body is telling you is you feel very anxious about this thing. That kind of thing for a student who doesn't have the language or the competency to know, when you say go meet 2 people, my back gets tight. Oh, I feel anxious. Okay, well, I can manage that. I need to understand that's what it's coming up in me, right? So the concrete teaching fluency with students in all sorts of different ways, I think is really, really useful. Okay, I love feedback in terms of using your monitoring and your assessments as a discussion starter. Yeah. And so instead of saying, how do you think about, or what do you think about, the feedback comes when you say, hey, you said this. So in that monitoring and assessment, you said this, let's start there. And now we can do feedback about, of course you feel that way, or could we change something? I love you said this. And I also love, this is true. So look, it is true that you're feeling some homesickness, distress. What can we do about that? Let's come together with a plan, as opposed to how you doing, right? So yeah, I love that discussion starter. Also, I think with your feedback, We are always looking to provide actionable information. So we
Yes.
don't just want to be like, isn't this interesting about you that you blah, 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 blah. That's terrible, right? I do not want to feel like I'm getting like you're dissecting me and being like, well, Rachel, isn't it interesting that you whatever? What I really want is for it to be something that we can do a thing about, even if it's small.
Yeah. Well, that's why I struggle sometimes when we do these big, even like predictive models, and they're based on test scores.
Yeah.
What do I do with that? Like, that's set in stone by the time the student comes to me. But if I understand that they're not attending all their classes, now I have something I can do.
Right. Right.
Even they're not feeling confident about classes, or they're not feeling confident about finances. Okay, feeling confident about finances is something that we can talk about. And we can look at the financial situation and figure out, is the feeling justified? Are there things we can do to alleviate some of that? So those are all actionable items. They're mutable. What is it? Mutable?
Yeah. Yeah.
Changeable.
So what that reminds me of is even those meta conversations and feedback that you're having with students, where you're saying, hey, so you feel anxious about finances. That's pretty common for college students because it's such a huge commitment and it is a lot of money. And so that's not necessarily out of line of what you should be feeling. That's pretty typical. Let's dig into that a little bit and see if maybe there's a special circumstance for you, or maybe you should be more concerned than the average student. But I'm just thinking about those meta conversations when we give the first test in college and they've never gotten anything other than an A before and they have a B. And the feedback to a student to say, this is pretty typical. You should know, like, we talk about this without ever having met you before. We talk about this all the time, that the first grade, it can be a shock to you and you can feel overwhelmed and it can make you question yourself. And so my feedback to you is, it's okay. Let's see what happens on the next test. Let's talk about ways that you can learn to study better. And then if it's still an issue, then we can do some different kind of feedback for you. But that meta conversation about, and I just think of like roommate conflict and transition and not being sure about your major and all of those things that we would say before I ever met you. I'm talking about how this would be a hard place to be. And it's okay. The feedback is that's totally normal, right?
You went home for the first weekend and realized everybody's going on with their lives, and you didn't realize that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Because nobody talks about that. Actually, that's really normal.
Yeah. So,
and yeah.
So that feedback is not necessarily that we are going to do anything other than take this thing that you're experiencing, that you're feeling, that you're concerned about. We're going to take it out and we're just going to look at it. And you're going to tell me as the expert in you what's happening internally. And I'm going to tell you as the expert in student success and retention. Yeah, of course you feel that way. That's totally a normal experience. And I think, Sherry, I'm always wondering about where are the places that we weave in natural opportunities to give that kind of feedback to students, because they don't know to come to us and say, oh my gosh, I'm totally overwhelmed. I failed this test. Yeah. We have to be at the place to say to them, I suspect you might feel overwhelmed because you failed the test. Here's everything I want to say about that to give you that appropriate feedback, right?
Do you know, that was one of the things that was so interesting to watch COVID happen. Many, many campuses had in their head the natural points in time at which things happened to students, with students, about students. So they knew at the 3-week mark, I'm going to do this, at the whatever mark I'm going to, and COVID kind of threw us in a loop. But I think, to your Kintsugi perspective, it gave us a chance to reflect on how much we really knew and how much we didn't know about those key points in time, and how do we make sure we're checking in.
Yeah. Because that frequent and often
Yes.
is not just about the monitoring and assessing. It is also about the way that we are giving feedback. You're doing a good job. This would be scary. I would feel anxious. That's totally normal. And so having those conversations, I think I've said to you before, we have an RA form where RAs at a lot of our schools are doing weekly check-ins with students. And so we have on that form, like, here are the things that we want you to be assessing with your students. Not every time, like you should be talking about whether or not they have a sense of belonging. Do they have their technology, right? Those sorts of things. Well, putting that list in front of an RA helps teach them about feedback for each of those things. So when an RA says, hey, so how's it going in your, do you have the technology you need? And students like, no, just the fact that an RA knew to ask that question gives me feedback that that is normal because they asked me about it. It must be a thing that comes up in conversation, right? So I think frequent feedback is so vital to just kind of a seamless experience of what you're experiencing versus what you should be experiencing or what's normal.
Yeah.
Okay, so this I think is coming directly out of your drum work, and that is feedback, which like practice with feedback. So as we're saying, you need to learn how to make friends. So we are going to give you positive, concrete feedback about how to do that. And then you are going to go practice that. And we're going to tell you, good job, or okay, next time, do it a little bit differently. So tell me how that relates to what you're doing as you're learning to play the drums.
Well, I think one of the things that we know about practice is to get really good at things. You could practice all the time, but if you practice bad habits, you're going to stay bad, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to find small little things that you're going to practice and master or get good at. So how do you break something down? So for me, I mean, part of like drums is you're breaking down one rhythm and you're just playing it until you get it.
Yeah.
And you do things for feedback. Either you do it in front of your instructor, which is really hard for a person my age who's stuck at something. And your instructor goes, Sherry, you need to play through the drum. Oh, I didn't know that.
Right.
And you also build in other sort of feedback mechanisms for yourself. Like one of the ones I do is I put a metronome on. And if I can keep the beat, that tells me when I'm speeding up, when I'm slowing down, and helps keep me. So think about that level of feedback and how much better it makes my practice.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is I was just reading something about if you're really not very good at something, you think you're great at it because you can't think of all of the mistakes you're making. Like you can't even imagine I should be playing through the drum. I had no idea, right? And when you get good at something, you're actually much harder on yourself because oh, I need to do that.
It isn't tight, it doesn't play right. I speed it up there. Well, they even teach you, and I'm sure this is true of many musical instruments, to record yourself. Because in the moment when you're playing, it all sounds great. And you listen to the recording and you're like, oh, so terrible.
Yeah, practice with feedback. It's funny, the most concrete example I can think of that is when I was little, my dad was a preacher. So when I was little, my dad's mission was to teach everybody how to shake hands well, young people. Yeah. And he would be like, hey, so you look the person in the eye, you grip their hand firmly, you say what your name is, very specific things. If you don't know those are the steps to a good handshake, you can do it and think you did a great job. And everyone's like, oh my goodness, that was a terrible handshake, right? But this idea of I'm going to teach you very specifically, positively, concretely, and then we're going to practice. And I'm going to say, that was too hard. You're not trying to break my hand. Like it's just a firm grip, right? Practice again with feedback. I think that is so helpful for students, both on the academic side and also in the student development side. And I'm thinking about things like conflict resolution, making friends, learning how to join, new social circles, trying something new. Those are all things that we can break down and say, just practice this one thing. Wow, you did a great job. Or, okay, next time do it this way. So
yeah, practice introducing yourself, practice, small talk. How many of us have forgotten the art of small talk? We need a little cheat sheet in our head to ask about
Yeah.
some silly things. I bring the drums. People ask me about the drums. It works great.
Yeah, there you go. That's
Yeah.
good. You just need a prop, Sherry. That's actually a really good, like,
Yeah.
just carry something interesting around with you.
or have something like that in your back pocket. But do we really teach 18-year-olds to do some of those things?
Yeah.
And especially when some of our old crutches may be gone, I can't smile at people like I used to. They don't know.
Yeah.
So how do I do something else to make myself approachable?
So the next thing that we have here is the idea that with our feedback, we want to make sure that we are using a common language so that everybody can understand what we're talking about. If you think about, I mean, I love homesickness distressed versus homesickness separated. That is a really powerful language to teach people, because first of all, what you're saying is lots of people are homesick. There's no shame in being homesick. There's nothing strange about it. Almost everybody is going to experience those pangs of, I wish I was at home. I miss my friends. I miss my family. But the way that you've divided that into those two different areas then helps us talk about very specific things that are in those differences, right? So I love changing the language and teaching people the language. I think I said to you, so if you guys do Enneagram, you can chat us what your Enneagram is, because I'm always interested. Do you know Enneagram, Sherry?
I do, but I don't know mine,
Okay.
which I think is funny.
Yeah, maybe I could guess what you are based on the fact that you don't, but I'm a 7. And the other day, one of my colleagues said to me, hey, you know that you're a 7 with an 8 wing, which is like, I'm mostly happy and excited and I like positive things, but occasionally there's this 8 part of me that comes out that's like a lioness and like, I'm going to rip everything to shreds. And as soon as they said that to me, I was like, oh my goodness, that is really true. Like, this is where that comes out and this is where that comes out. And because now we have that common language, we can joke about like, hey, you're full on 8 right now. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Okay, let me take it back a level. That gives us a way to when somebody says you're being an 8 right now, with that simple language, I understand a whole gigantic pool of information. And so being able to help people understand, here's what we're talking about when we're talking about homesickness, distressed, place of belonging, sense of belonging, right? This is what we mean. Find that inside yourself, and then let's have a conversation about it, because we have this shorthand together.
I also have to say, common language is a piece of belonging. So by sharing a common language with a student that you can go back and forth, you are creating belonging. Yeah. So it's like double win. Somebody else was saying something about there were a 1 and a 9.
Yeah, Carolyn's a 1 with the wing 9. That's helpful. I think that's what my daughter is. So anyway, see, common language. And Sherry, to your point, like when Carolyn says that, because she and I know what that means, that's a thing. And you're like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what I am. I don't know if I understand that language. It's a great example of how that language either draws you in and makes you feel like I know what we're talking about, or makes you feel like I'm not really sure what that means.
Know it, right?
What should I be doing about that, right?
What, like the Myers-Briggs or the Strengths Finder or all of those.
Yeah.
Or, the same thing of, TV show characters.
Right.
Oh, you're acting like a such and such. Now we both have a common
know what that means. Yeah. So that feedback, you should be building into it that common language so that it becomes a shorthand for all of the stuff that we have been talking about. Okay, so I want to talk about nudges, because I think this is another way we give feedback. Let me delineate between the feedback that we've been talking about is very specific. It is like we're saying, do this thing. It is concrete. It is positive. It is coming from a direct communication where you were telling a student, this is what you are going to do next. Practice this thing, that you did a good job there. I think about nudges as a little bit more subtle. So they're not necessarily this directive that we're giving. It's creating social cues or using technology or environmental cues to subtly nudge a student in a direction without having to be as directive and as concrete as this other feedback, right? So if we think about nudges, I was thinking about social nudges. And by that, I mean like a subtle thing that I do that is going to nudge a student or a person in a certain direction. So social meaning like between two people, right? My best example of this is as a mom, I have a mom face, which I think all moms do. So that if my daughter is across the room and she's doing something she should not be doing, when she looks up at me, the social nudge is my mom face, which tells her, hey, stop what you're doing, or you need to not do that any longer, right? I'm nudging her in that direction. And it's not directive. It's just, she knows this is a social cue. I don't like what you're doing. You better stop. Sherry, surely you have a mom face too.
Of course. Of course.
Okay.
Well, and we also resorted when the kids were really little to sign language.
Yeah. 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 So,
mom face combo, right?
Yes. I love this idea that there are subtle things that we can do. I was trying to think of other examples. So for example, in U100, if we're in your first year class, your freshman class, if we are subtly, socially trying to nudge students to register for classes, at a certain time in the semester, you could have a social nudge where you would say, hey, I'm thinking about your schedule next semester class. How many of you are going to take communications? Oh, awesome. Okay. How many of you are going to take this? What about this? Do you have Dr. Beck for this? That kind of social nudging where we're not saying, hey guys, go register for your classes. But we're saying in this context, do you see how this is a thing that you should know? You should have an idea of who your classes are. Do you see how these other students are doing that? That is a nudge for someone to be like, oh, well, that's exciting. I could go know who my classes are going to be, right? Those social nudges, I think, are really important to be able to utilize subtly. And then technology does this really well. So there's a lot of conversation about technology nudges where it's like, if you haven't done this thing, we're going to say, are you interested in signing up for classes when you log on for your email or whatever? But then we also were talking about environmental nudges, which if you think about in an airport, how you know how to get out of the airport, it's super subtle things like the tile color changes and turns into a pathway, or in a hotel or like in a college campus, how you're saying this is a space where we spend time together and you can be loud and boisterous because the lights are high and there's lots of open area. Whereas like in an airport lounge, they have these things separated out. It's like this space is a place for you to be quiet. This is a place for you to be talking to each other, right? This is a place where you're going to be on your computer. So I think in feedback, the delineation between direct, you should be doing this concrete thing, and then we're going to practice and we're going to do it really well. And these nudges that we can use to really subtly guide our students towards healthy, successful behavior is an important distinction in those two.
Don't you think in the classroom we do that? Because if I set up a classroom where we're all in a circle, I have told you.
Yeah.
Very clearly that everybody's going to participate in this circle.
Yeah.
Whereas if I have a lecture hall, or even in a flat classroom, if I have very rigid rows, I have told you that you are the audience and right. I am the speaker.
I am, and you're going to listen. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I mean, I think it would be such an interesting, I wish I just had a bunch of free time because I would love to just go around on a campus and just write down all of the nudges. Because in the same way that they are powerful, if they are unconscious and negative, pushing you in a negative direction, that's the place that we have. I mean, it's like conditionally admitted students. The reason I love language so much is because it does nudge a student one way or another. We'll see if you make it versus opportunity, right? So I think that that is so important to be able to delineate. Okay. Like we always do, we have action items for you guys. So let's go through these, and then I'm going to do kind of a summary on what I think are the most important points on feedback. So my 2 action items for you guys are, please remember, as you are thinking about feedback, like I always say, connect and then solve. You are communicating 2 things to this person: unconditional positive regard. I see you. I want you to be successful. I'm on your team. And I'm going to help you learn how to make friends. I'm going to help you learn how to be successful in the classroom. I'm going to help you learn how to introduce yourself to faculty. That hierarchy is super important. And then the other thing I was thinking about is, in feedback, we want to make sure that our students understand why we're telling them. It is not that they are in trouble. It's that we're saying, hey, I looked at your student impact survey or your student readiness survey, and I noticed that you're really worried about fitting in or about making friends or about being successful academically. And I have some tricks to help you with that. And so what I'm going to say now is the magic way that you are going to practice and get really good at that. Sit on the front row. The reason I'm telling you is not to ruin your life, but it's because I know that is a way that you can relieve some of your anxiety about being academically successful. So I think for students, just giving them the context of, I'm not trying to be bossy, I'm actually trying to help you accomplish the thing that you're wanting or alleviate the anxiety that you're feeling. So stick with me and do these things, and we're going to get to the place you want to go. I think that that is so important when you're giving feedback. And Sherry, your action items follow all of our requirements.
All of our advice. Well, how could I give action items and not? So to me, the action items are very, very small things, but one of them is, tomorrow, listen to how you provide feedback. And we all should probably do that periodically, but is it concrete? Is it small? Is it to the positive?
Yeah.
And maybe where are you not doing that? But like focus on where you're really nailing it. And it may be in the student meeting, it may be with somebody you supervise, it may be who knows where, but listen to how you're doing feedback. And then the day after that, practice, very purposely pick one interaction that you're going to try to do it just a little bit better, a little bit more concrete, a little bit more positive, something, and see how it works. I think all of this stuff is experiments. Just experiment and get better and better.
Right? I think that, what we said earlier about when you're focusing on what's not working and the negative piece, you can't problem solve because you're just like, oh my gosh, it's such a wreck. But if you pick the thing that you're doing really well, like, wow, that was great, I'm going to try it in this circumstance tomorrow, then you do have creative power to be able to think of all the ways that you could tweak or change, or that worked well, or, so I love that. So I would just say, you guys, do not separate monitoring and assessment, which you should be doing through iClickers and academic. You should be doing that through surveys for your students, for your faculty, all of those ways, monitor and assess. And then also, as you're giving feedback, using that data, you should have it in Ferris 360 so the right people can see it, so they can give the right feedback. All of those elements are super important in order to help your students be successful with feedback. I'm really excited about the idea that those things can be integrated, right? That we can do these surveys and that can come in really seamlessly to 360 and you can use it. So next week, we are going to be talking about, let me see, I have my list. Okay, next week we are talking about involvement. So this, I think we've talked a lot today about how we can help students be involved by giving them this feedback. So that will be really fun to think through. Also, I wanted to tell those of you who are joining us, we are seeing, even if schools don't have a vaccine mandate or a mask mandate, they are, I think it's like 71% of schools are tracking vaccines. So we have been working really, really hard the last couple of weeks to come up with a vaccine tracking workflow in Ferris 360. A lot of our schools are using us to track COVID, but now there's like, how do we see whether or not a student has shown that they're vaccinated? So if that's a thing that would be helpful for you guys, just contact us. We're happy to push that out so that you can see it and use it, because I think it is something that students or that schools are struggling a little bit with as we're moving forward. And I don't think it's going to go away soon. So it would be nice just to get that implemented and figure out, how to use our software to do that well. Sherry, thank you so much. I always learn so much when I get to spend time with you. And so I appreciate you joining me.
Ditto. Now I got to go back and listen to how I, talk to everybody.
That's the problem with this. It always is like more work. Like, okay, I can do better on that. I'm going to go back and
just little things. We can do little.
Absolutely.
Little improvements.
You guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a great week, and join us next week for more Cap and Gown. Have a great day.